The fall of Afghanistan, how it happened, what's next? Evacuation flights resumed today out of the Kabul airport as thousands of Afghans try to flee their country after the collapse of the government and its armed forces. It's not clear how many people were able to get out today. On Sunday, the Taliban swept into Kabul, the final city held by the Afghan government, stunning the world and raining criticism on the U.S. and the Biden administration for the decision to withdraw troops. Yesterday, President Biden defended his actions. I'm Jennifer Rooks. Today on Maine Calling, we will discuss the situation in Afghanistan with one of the leading journalists and scholars of the region, Robin Wright of the New Yorker and Woodrow Wilson International Center. We'll also hear from others closely connected with the country. Maine Calling is next, but first, this news update. Welcome to Maine Calling. I'm Jennifer Rooks. The situation in Afghanistan remains chaotic, and this hour we will talk with several people who are deeply connected with the country to try to gain perspective and understanding. Joining us now, Robin Wright, who is a columnist with The New Yorker and a senior fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She is also the author of 8 books on the Middle East, including Rock the Casbah, Rage and Rebellion Across the Islamic World. Robin, it is my sincere privilege to welcome you to Maine Calling.
I'm delighted to be with you.
And a note, our phone service provider has had a major outage today, so our phones are down. Please send us your questions either by email, talk@mainepublic.org, tweet @MaineCalling, post a comment to our Facebook page or to Instagram. Again, please don't call the number. You're not going to get through. Our email address, talk@mainepublic.org. Robin, we have been watching the news, constantly for the last 3, 4, 5 days. It is all so upsetting seeing the images, hearing the interviews with people who have loved ones trapped inside of Afghanistan. I think the big question is, was there a better way to end this? A better way for the U.S. to get out?
That's a long question, or a complicated question. At the end of the day, all 4 presidents since 9/11 have made miscalculations and mistakes in charting the course in Afghanistan. The most recent one was President Trump deciding that he would do a separate deal between the United States and the Taliban so that the US troops could withdraw. What it didn't provide for was a political solution between the rivals who've been fighting it out, the Afghan army and the Taliban. And so once that deal was done last year and a date set for the withdrawal, all the Taliban had to do was sit it out until the Americans left. And as they did in the last few days, walk into Kabul and then walk into the presidential palace. There was, I think, 2 major mistakes kind of over the last year that have contributed to the chaos and what is in many ways a humiliating, even disgraceful way to end America's longest war.
Go ahead. What do you blame?
Well, I think there have been lots of mistakes. Look, the intelligence community didn't understand that the Taliban had such a strong backing that it, with vintage equipment, could challenge the Afghan army, which is 4 times, or was 4 times its side, and force the United States to withdraw. There were military miscalculations in terms of how do you do it, when do you do it, how do you provide for not just getting American troops and diplomats out, but also all the loyal Afghans who have worked as interpreters and local staff who've helped not just embassies and not just Americans, but lots of Western embassies, the Germans, the British, the French, the Australians, the Canadians, the Japanese, all of them have relied on Afghans. So in the end, we didn't do the kind of planning required. We didn't understand that the Taliban could move this quickly. We didn't understand that the Afghan army, which general after general after general has said, they're fighting better every day. they can take on the Taliban. The current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said in 2013, yes, making very, very significant progress. And of course, they, in the end, with vintage equipment, they don't even share common uniforms. They don't have air power. They don't have, tanks and artillery or major modern weaponry. And they managed to force the United States out. And I think the politics of this nation have also contributed to divisions, that we don't look at America as having one united approach to foreign policy. How are we going to do things? It becomes a political issue. And we kind of spit at each other, the different parties, the different politicos, when it comes to what should we be doing. And we're seeing some of that play out right now, when, for my money, everyone shares a bit of the blame.
Let me ask you this. You talked about, how quickly this happened and how our intelligence didn't see this coming. Robin, how did our intelligence fail this badly? It's not as though this is North Korea and we weren't there. We have been there for 20 years. How did intelligence fail?
I think that we have barometers or metrics of what a success looks like. How many guys have you trained? We trained 300,000 Afghan troops at a cost of $83 billion. We armed them with modern equipment, airplanes. We thought that their training, their equipment meant that they had the will. In the end, because of the corrupt government in Kabul, led by Ashraf Ghani, formerly employee of the World Bank, that they thought of him as corrupt, as self-absorbed, stubborn, unwilling to make the kind of compromises. And in the end, a lot of the Afghans didn't want to put their lives on the line for Ashraf Ghani. And of course, what was really stunning is that he fled the country and didn't even tell a lot of his partners in government what he was doing.
I saw today that the news is that flights have resumed. People are being evacuated. What do you, I know I don't want to ask you to predict too much, but do you see a scenario in which the people who need to get out are going to be able to get out?
First of all, we have to consider numbers. The number being bandied around for the Americans is 10,000. 10,000 who are dual nationals or who worked for American government agencies or prominent NGOs. But I think what we forget is that a lot of those people who work for us have families, their wives, their children. And we saw on some of the flights that many of those who are abandoning Afghanistan or looking for a way out are men. And so there's a big question about what happens to the family. Then there's also the wider question of what about our allies? We corralled 132 countries to join our coalition, one of the largest, if not the largest coalition ever assembled to fight a war in history. And many of them have their own people that they need to get out. And I think they will rely on the United States, whether it's to protect the airport or ensure that chaos doesn't disrupt the exodus. But it's hard to see how we get all those people out by August 31st, which was the original date to conclude the US mission in Afghanistan.
You write, this is not just an epic defeat for the US. The fall of Kabul may be seen as a bookend for the end of the era of US global power. You see this as one of the most important dates in US history.
I think so. And remember, we became a superpower in the aftermath of World War II. We helped rescue Western Europe, fighting the sophisticated Nazi war machine. We then fought, using our land, air, and sea powers, the formidable Japanese Empire, and we won. And that made us a superpower. We were the leader of the West, of the free world, of democracies. What's been notable in the last few decades, beginning with Vietnam and the dramatic pullout again from an embassy, that famous shot of the helicopter, people climbing to the roof to try to get on it. Then there was Beirut, where the US was forced to pull out Marine peacekeepers who had been victimized by a ragtag local Shiite militia. 241 Marines died in what was the largest non-nuclear explosion anywhere on Earth in 1983. And Iraq, we went into Iraq, we're going to create a different kind of country. We pulled out in 2011, and what happened? ISIS moved in and seized a third of Iraq, a third of Syria, redrew the Middle East map. The dangers play out on a lot of levels. One is that jihadism, which we thought we had marginalized, has won a key battle against democracy. When you think what we did in Afghanistan, we fostered multiple democratic elections that witnessed the transfer of power from one president to another. Our education, the NGOs, and the aid that went into helping educate girls, 37% of girls can now read. That we made a difference. There was a vibrant civil society in Afghanistan, courtesy of a lot of American NGOs. The danger is that we are again forced out by this really small militia, 60,000 fighters in a country the size of Texas. That's not very much. And again, the Afghan army was 4 times that size, and the United States and NATO had a huge, at one point had a very large presence there. And that we are scurrying out, leaving behind chaos, a very indeterminate future, 2 decades after the 9/11 attacks, I think makes us look just like the Soviets in 1989, who walked across the Friendship Bridge into the Soviet Union to end their decade-long occupation. We are both losers. We have our tails between our legs, and we are leaving behind a very uncertain future. So I think history is going to begin looking at us in terms of the sequence of events captured by what happened with the Taliban just walking into the presidential palace. And remember, the longest war is not over with the US leaving. The longest war has many years to play out, because while we paid $1 trillion for the military activities in Afghanistan, there are estimates that it will take another $2 trillion just to pay for the medical care and disability of the American forces who were maimed or disabled or injured in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And that peak of support will not end until the year 2048.
Mm. On the PBS NewsHour last night, retired General H.R. McMaster said that he believes the withdrawal from Afghanistan will have severe security consequences. Today, I'm seeing reports that all of the American supplied weapons will end up in the hands of the Taliban. Robin, do you believe that this only makes the global jihadist movement stronger?
Well, in the last 20 years, global jihadism has spread through franchises of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others. Just last month, the United States sanctioned an ISIS franchise in Mozambique, which is a former Portuguese colony in Southern Africa, where the majority, 60% of the population, is Christian. So yes, I worry that you still have 16 to 18,000 ISIS fighters in Iraq and Syria. They don't have their caliphate anymore. That the United States did manage, but it will involve a long-term presence to ensure that ISIS doesn't take territory again. And I think the mood in America is, let's get out. We've lost enough treasure and blood. And there's an argument there. I'm not trying to take a side or say what policy should be, but I think that we as a country that's so remote from so many parts of the world don't understand other cultures, the determination of local players. And, democracy lost that battle against a hardline ideology with a strong local following. It's numbing that our democracy was pushed aside by the Taliban and its barbaric middle-age practices.
Is there any reason for any kind of hope for what's next for Afghanistan?
I can't answer that question because there's so much uncertainty involving all that's playing out on a daily basis yet. President Biden said yesterday he was going to continue to argue for whether it's women's education or freedom of the press and some of the basic principles of democracy, but I don't know how he does that. We don't have an intelligence presence on the ground, or not much of one. If we do, and it'll be largely locals, we don't have the military instruments, which will be based in some of the Gulf sheikdoms, whether it's Qatar or Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. And so it's very hard to see how we do that and how we stay engaged in Afghanistan in any significant way. The one piece of leverage we have is aid. And that's something, of course, Americans are not going to want to provide the Taliban. But the Afghan economy is heavily dependent on foreign aid. The United States basically paid the salaries of the entire Afghan military and police force. And that money's going to dry up. The Germans announced this morning no more aid. I suspect that's true of the United States, whether it's done or in the planning stage, that the Taliban are going to find that's very difficult. This is not a country with a lot of oil. Its terrain is incredibly hostile. There are water issues. And so the Taliban will, at some point, need support or financial input. Will it get it from the Chinese, the Russians? Possibly.
I'm going to go to a comment. Jeff on Facebook writes, Ron Paul in the Senate 10 years ago said withdraw as quickly as possible or we will be there for years and then still withdraw with no lasting results.
Well, it looks prescient at the moment, but there have been a lot of people who called for withdrawals beginning just a year after the U.S. intervention. Mike Morrell, who's the deputy CIA director, said, looking back, it might have been better once we forced the Taliban either underground or to flee, once we marginalized and forced the Taliban out of power, once we created a new government, maybe that was the moment. The question is, of course, would the same thing have happened 19 years ago? That's happening today. And those are all hypotheticals we don't have the answer to.
Our guest right now, we're speaking with Robin Wright, author, columnist with the New Yorker. She is with the Woodrow Wilson Center, one of the leading scholars on the Middle East, and we are talking, of course, about Afghanistan. A note that our phones are down, so please send your questions by email to talk@mainpublic.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We'll be right back.
Listener support brings us Maine Calling, with help from Maine State Music Theater with Jersey Boys, the story of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, September 1st through the 19th. MSMT.org. By New England Naturopathic Health, focused on individually oriented and minimally invasive health care. Naturopathicme.com. And by Valo, guiding teens toward emotional well-being to connect with community and ignite a future with hope. ValoMaine.org.
I am Tamara Antunes, a member of the Maine Public News Connect team. Each week, Maine Public News stories are translated into Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Somali to provide important news to the Maine's diverse communities. O Maine Public criou novo serviço de notícias que pensamos que vocês irão valorizar. Todas as semanas, disponibilizamos pequenos vídeos em português que oferecem notícias do Maine a partir da semana, notícias que podem fornecer informações importantes para a sua comunidade. Os vídeos das notícias do Maine Public News Connect estão disponíveis todas as sextas-feiras à tarde no mainepublic.org, bem como no Facebook e no YouTube. Please help us spread the word about this exciting new service. Thank you.
And welcome back. This is Maine Calling. I'm Jennifer Rooks, and we are talking about Afghanistan. We are talking with Robin Wright, who is a New Yorker columnist. She is the author of 8 books, including Rock the Casbah. She is an expert on the Middle East with the Woodrow Wilson Center. Share your comments and questions by email, talk@mainpublic.org. Our phones are down. Our provider has had a major outage. Or find us on Facebook or Instagram or tweet @Maine Calling. Robin Wright, I want to ask you about Pakistan. What does this mean for Pakistan? What does it mean for India?
Well, it's obviously very good for the Pakistani government, which has supported the Taliban, allowed it to create a safe haven in Quetta, and supported it all these years. Remember, bin Laden was in Pakistan when the United States killed him. So Pakistan is the one great ally that the Taliban has and will continue to have. Needless to say, India is not going to be super happy about what's happened. It has its own tensions with Pakistan, and Afghanistan was in some ways one of the arenas in which their tensions played out. But Pakistan also played the long game and lied to the United States over and over and over about what it was doing, offering promises that would crack down on the Taliban and other extremist groups, and it didn't.
I have an email from Bill who says, it seems to be way off the mark to explain the failure of Afghan forces to repel the Taliban. It was not a math error or a miscalculation of arms. It was not a missed diplomatic opportunity. It was a failure to respect the factor of will to fight. Clearly, the Afghan forces had none, zero. As to why this is, I will leave that as an open and key question. Also, your guest said U.S. armed forces were fleeing from the Taliban. I can't believe the U.S. Army or Foreign Service is in any way fleeing from any direct threat. I'm not sure that was exactly what you said, Robin, but tell us what your sense is of what the Afghan forces were doing. It seemed almost as if sometimes, from what I was watching on the news, they had some sort of arrangement in many of these cities with the Taliban.
Well, the key question, of course, is will, and who are they loyal to? The United States could create a force, but was that force willing to fight for the government of Afghanistan? And one of the problems, of course, is that President Ghani and his predecessor were notoriously corrupt. And President Ghani was also very stubborn. He could have gotten a political agreement with the Taliban much earlier than, well, we never really had one. But he could have negotiated a transfer of power that would have prevented the kind of tragedy we see playing out today. And again, for him to simply flee. Remember, Secretary of State Blinken talked to him on Saturday. And Sunday morning, he was gone. And the State Department won't answer the question whether the U.S. had any idea whether he was leaving. It doesn't look like it. We may have had some intelligence as he was leaving, but you had a disconnect. The government and its military force, and a lot of them simply didn't want to fight the Taliban on behalf of a government they may not have believed in or believe would protect them.
This is really interesting. I have 2 different emails coming in, and it seems from them that one person is very young and the other person old enough to be this person's grandparent. So I'm going to start with the older email. This is from Peter. I crossed Afghanistan 50 years ago as I made my way overland from Nepal to Europe. I was impressed by the size and diversity of Afghanistan. Over the years, no real sense of nationhood emerged there. Tribal politics dominated. I wrote about Afghanistan for Asia Times, and I saw the National Army as only a veneer and no substitute for a deeper sense of nationhood. The Afghans deserved a much better outcome, but there was too much corruption and abuse. Sad it came to this. And then from Logan, I am a 21-year-old college student, and I have no recollection of 9/11 or the outbreak of the Afghan war. How and why did the United States build a democratic government in Afghanistan that the Afghani people didn't support? Why didn't the U.S. do enough to fight corruption within the government it was propping up? It seems like our government gave up and left after 20 years without any actual plan on how to support the success of government.
Well, the United States' intention was to continue supporting the government with aid to help pay for the military. I mean, none of us know what it's going to do going forward. The United States mission it's not our responsibility to clean out corruption. It's the goal of the Afghan government to prosecute, to identify and investigate corruption and deal with it. We're not a colonial power. We came in to prop up a democratic government, foster elections, education, creation of civil society. Our mission was not to clean the place up. And I think Americans have a misconception of what our responsibilities were. On the last question, I will say the United States isn't fleeing, but it is withdrawing and leaving behind chaos. And we're scurrying out. Again, because there was that terrible gap between what President Trump promised in terms of a deal with the Taliban so we could leave, and then the fact that there was no political solution in place once the U.S. left to broker a compromise so that the place wouldn't break down into civil war again, as it did after the Soviet Union withdrew in 1989.
On the line with us, I believe now, is Reza Jalali, Executive Director of the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center, a writer, educator, immigrant, advocate, and former refugee from Iran. Reza, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Jennifer. Thank you for including my voice in this.
Yes, thank you so much with the phone problems, making sure we have you through Zoom. Welcome back to the program, and thank you so much for giving us a call. And Reza, I know that you would like to talk about how Mainers can help support the local Afghan community here in Maine. Tell us what people can do.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, what we have is a humanitarian crisis unfolding in front of our eyes. And knowing the generosity and the kindness that Mainers have expressed and shown in the past in terms of accepting and welcoming, at least in this case, the recent refugees and immigrants. So I'm sure that Maine is capable of welcoming some refugees, many more refugees from Afghanistan. And I think that's what we need to focus. I invite you listeners that at least we need to be talking about the innocents caught in the middle and those who've been displaced by this new round of violence in Afghanistan. And so I would urge those with power, those in charge of making policies, including all Mainers, all of us, to work together to find ways we could help some of the Afghans to arrive in Maine. And we have the services. We have a significant number of Afghan Americans who've called Maine for the past few decades. And so we could be welcoming those and helping those. And I think people from Afghanistan deserve this. They deserve our support. And it's a time to be thinking of them.
And Reza, I understand that you've been in touch with people from the Afghan American community here in Maine and that they've been hesitant to talk with reporters right now during these days. But tell us what they would like people who are their neighbors and people who live in their communities to know about what they're going through right now.
Well, as you can imagine, they are terrified. And as they're watching the news, as we watch it, except in their cases, they have family members who still live in Afghanistan. They have members of the extended families. They have the neighbors, their classmates, and they're worried about them, as we are. But in their case, it's much more personal. So understandably so, they're not ready to talk to the media, but that we need to ensure that we give them some space. They are grieving, and but at the same time, we need to be there to support them. And something that the Immigrant Welcome Center that I'm part of has been doing to get in touch with Afghan community leaders, offering our support and we're there to help them in terms if they need to receive counseling, if they have any issue that, if simply they want to talk to someone. We're there and we'll continue to do so. They are part of our community. They have contributed so much to the Maine in terms of every life, every aspect of life. And as our new neighbors, and some not very new, we respect and honor the presence among us. And so it's time that we rehumanize them and think of them as people who are in need of help. And they are worried not only about their immediate family members, but about the nation, and also those who have worked with the American government. Many of us are very concerned, and those are the calls we're getting in our offices, those who have acted as interpreters, as drivers, as support staff helping the Americans while the U.S. forces or diplomats live there. And we can't just turn our back on them. I mean, this is different than the politics of it. There'd be time we could get into whose fault was it and the blaming. But right now, I think we need to focus on people of Afghanistan, the civilians, the women and children.
Reza, thank you so much for calling in. That's Reza Jalali, Executive Director of the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center. And Robin Wright, these stories are throughout the United States of America and really the Western world. I heard an interview on The World last week with a young student at Oxford University in London worried about her family and her loved ones.
Yes, Americans are traditionally very generous in taking in those who are facing life-threatening situations or don't have incomes or homes. I hope Americans do this again. These are people who helped us, often for not much money, not knowing what the future would be, and we do owe them something as a nation.
Joining us now from Gorham is San Pao. He's a clinical social worker, a Purple Heart recipient. He also served with the Army National Guard in Afghanistan. San, thanks so much for giving us a call. And I want to ask you, what were you thinking and feeling as you saw Afghanistan fall to the Taliban?
Hello there. Thank you for having me. And so my initial thoughts and reactions was a lot of anger and discontent for what's happening, and but with a deeper thought and understanding of mental health and emotions is that, I know I've given a lot, and so I have to be okay with that. And then as we further think, or I was thinking, was like, my gosh, the families of the fallen, we must take care of them now and check in with them more so now than ever as well, because I'm sure they're grieving even harder because of what's happening there, and they may feel that their loved ones' death wasn't enough, and that's the unfortunate part, that they lost a loved one, and we need to be there with them and not just anybody else.
San, give us some guidance. If someone is listening to this program right now and they know someone who lost a loved one in Afghanistan, serving in Afghanistan, what can I do? What can that person do? Give us some words. Give us some actions.
Yeah, of course. So for the folks who know somebody who has lost a loved one, check in with them and ask how they're doing. Stop over, bring some food, bring something that you can have a conversation, coffee, tabletop conversation with, right? Something light, and just to see how they're doing. Because one of the tough things that we do, or folks who are going through some hard times, is asking for help. How often do we hear, our friends or loved ones or somebody just saying, if you need something, son, just let me know. But the reality is that it's going to be hard for us to reach out. So for those who are the Gold Star family members, right, speaking to each other, reaching out to support groups, talking to your providers, your therapists, your friends, your person, right? That's what we need to do. But more so, as a community, we need to check in with them and not have them reach out to us first.
Before we go, I want to ask you as a therapist, what do you say to your fellow Afghan war veterans who are experiencing a different time watching the news and perhaps those who have experienced post-traumatic stress? I know that there are real worries about people who have are going to feel a resurgence of that.
For that, for our war fighters to know that you have done more than enough. You have done so much that our country will never be able to repay you. And to know that everything that you have done and left on the battlefield can never be repaid. But also note that everything that you have done is worth every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears that you're going to go through and the emotions that you're having right now. It's all normal and natural for us to have it, to reach out and speak to someone.
Thank you so much for calling in. That's San Pao, who served with the Army National Guard in Afghanistan. He is a social worker who offers counseling, including to veterans. Also going to say goodbye to Robin Wright. Robin, thank you so much for joining us for most of this program. Robin is a New Yorker contributor and columnist, the author of several books, including Rock the Casbah and several others on the Middle East. I have posted her most recent column on our Maine Calling Facebook page. We will be right back.
Listener support brings us Maine Calling, with help from Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, hosting online workshops and the Pitch Conference on September 25th. MaineWriters.org. By Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, building a team of volunteers for the Common Ground Country Fair, September 24th through 26th. Details at mofca.org. And by Theater at Monmouth, with Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, a dark comedy about the nature of love and mercy. Theater at Monmouth.org.
I'm Robin Young. We'll have the latest on the situation in Afghanistan and Haiti. Also, the Federal Restaurant Revitalization Fund is out of money, and only a third of restaurants who applied got it. We'll check in with an owner facing closure.
It's my whole life. We're hurting so much right now. We need these funds.
Next time, Here and Now.
Stay with us. Here and Now, upcoming shortly at 12 noon today here on Maine Public Radio. Have you subscribed to The 10? The 10 is Maine Public's weekly e-newsletter that takes a closer look at the 10 exceptional, thought-provoking, and compelling stories. These stories are not necessarily from the week's headlines. In fact, most are stories that you may have missed from Maine Public Radio, NPR, PBS, the BBC, and more. To sign up or to check out past issues of The 10, please visit mainepublic.org.
And welcome back. I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is Maine Calling. We are talking about Afghanistan today. We are joined now by two more really important and interesting guests. Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, is with us. You will also probably know him from CNN, Cable News Network, and with us right now, Barbara Elias, Associate Professor of Government at Bowdoin College, who specializes in international relations, insurgency warfare, U.S. foreign policy, Islam, and politics. She is the author of Why Allies Rebel, Defiant Local Partners in Counterinsurgency Wars. Thank you both for being here. Aaron David Miller, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Robin right at the top of the program. Was there a better way to end this, a better way for the U.S. to get out of Afghanistan?
I have no doubt that's the case. I think it was to some degree an intelligence failure, to some degree a messaging failure, to some degree an absence of coordination failure. The strategy was 100, in my judgment, 100% right. What we couldn't do with 100,000 forces in 2010, we were not going to do with 2,500 in 2021. Our counterterrorism strategy, which brought us to Afghanistan and remains the single most important American vital interest we have in the country, evolved into a idealized fantasy that somehow the United States, which cannot even address its own broken house here, could somehow address the difficulties of repairing the absence of centralized government, tribal rivalries, corruption, nepotism, kleptocracy in Kabul. So the strategy was correct. They will be second guessing this for a long time to come. It will remain a scar on the Biden presidency. Whether the administration can regroup is arguable. The Pentagon briefing assured us today that between 5,000 and 9,000 humans can be taken out in the days to come. That's clearly the remaining Americans, not just those associated with the American government, but with NGOs, humanitarian organizations. And of course, the perhaps 88,000, including family members of the Afghans who worked closely with us in varying capacities over the last 20 years. Was there a plan B? Was there a, quote unquote, to borrow a term from Vietnam, a decent interval of several months that would somehow have allowed the extrication of American forces without the chaos and the disaster that's unfolded over the past week or so? It's arguable. I could have imagined securing the airport in advance to prevent that chaos, consultation with allies, facilitating the SIV, the Special Immigrant Visa Program, which is heavily bureaucratized for security reasons and all kinds of other reasons. Get people out, have them go to American military bases around the world, check their documents there, but don't leave them in the sense that we've abandoned Afghanistan. But make no mistake, Jennifer, absolutely no mistake, whether there was a decent interval of 2 weeks, 2 months, or 6 months, what you saw evolve and unfold over the course of the last 3 weeks, the collapse of an Afghan military that was underpaid, under-resourced, and unwilling to fight for a corrupt government that had failed to deliver, the fact that the key warlords succumbed to the Taliban as well, the fact that Ghani chose to leave the country, all of these things was emblematic, in my judgment, of a failed enterprise. Final point, the real transgression here, I would argue, if this were a court of law, the criminal transgression, was that a decade ago, our political leaders in 3 administrations and our military knew this was an unwinnable war, and that the entire Afghan enterprise of trying to remake or make a centralized, coherent, prosperous, secure, non-corrupt political system in Afghanistan, that was simply impossible. That, to me, like Vietnam, they knew the war was unwinnable and the goals unattainable. That's what needs to be understood and never repeated again.
Barbara, you are an expert in local allies and counterinsurgency wars like this one. You've heard what Aaron had to say. You've heard Robin. How do you see this?
It's complicated, right? So I'd say after the failure of the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy said, victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. In this case, I think we should flip it, that this defeat has hundreds of root causes, some big, some small, that all led us up to today. And so I think that there's a lot of different issues that are all coming to bear right now, and that there is a lot of reckoning and a lot of blame that needs to be carefully sorted out and reconsidered.
Right now, the Taliban is issuing announcements of amnesty and unity. Barbara, should we believe these pronouncements?
That's a good question. So the Taliban pride themselves on keeping law and order. That's always been kind of their signature. We will keep law and we will keep order. But, we will be the Taliban. We will be the answer to the chaos of civil war and the end to corruption in Afghanistan. And they will say whatever they need to say to keep people calm and cooperative right now. But they should not be trusted to be moderate in any way or to keep promises of reconciliation. Unity to them is domination. There are reports, for example, of Afghan special operations forces and pilots that trained with Americans going missing as we speak. And it's worth remembering that the last time the Taliban conquered Kabul in 1996, when they located the former Russian allied Afghan president Najibullah, who was ostensibly under UN protection after the Russians withdrew, the Taliban was far from friendly with the former president. They castrated him and killed him and then dragged his body through the streets. I do not necessarily think there will be ISIS-style mass killings, but the people who worked with the U.S. that are in Afghanistan are not safe, and I don't think that the Taliban will keep promises of amnesty. Watching this unfold before us in horror, we want the Taliban to be reasonable, to reconcile, to compromise, to respect basic human rights, but they've never done those things, and I don't think we should expect it now. And our heartbreak, frankly, over this lost war should not make us hopeful that the Taliban will be moderate. They rule by fear, and they will be violent, frightening, and relentless.
An email here from Sophia. Where was the CIA in all of this? We paid them gobs of money to know what's going on. Since Trump's deal, many in the Afghan army made deals with the Taliban. Did the CIA not know this? I believe Biden was ill-served by another intelligence failure, but plans for getting the translators out should have started as soon as Biden entered office, with all of our allies around the world who fought with us helping. I am so angry at the poor performance at our intelligence agencies and President Biden for not demanding more. Aaron.
Well, first of all, my dear friend of 40 years, William Burns, is now the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So I'm hesitant, both for personal and professional reasons, to begin. I think Barbara is right in terms of victory and failure and orphans. I have no idea what assessments CIA or the intelligence community as a whole, the IC, was presenting to the president. There are some media reports indicating that the intelligence community assessment, most recent one in June, predicted a 3 to 6 month period in which the Taliban would try to assert its dominance over most of the provincial capitals and to take Kabul as well. I have no idea whether that was that clearly was an accurate assessment, whether that was the assessment the intelligence community provided the president, whether or not if CIA's reports were grimmer and more negative, whether the president actually would listen to them. It wouldn't be the first time, frankly, that an American president has ignored the warnings of the intelligence community. And without good intel and with the presence of bad analysis, bad policy results. So I can't answer that question. But again, I'm hesitant to identify a single agency or an actor here. This president, if he were on this call and he was prepared to be honest and open, he would say the following to you: intelligence failure or not. He would say there is simply no single foreign policy issue out there or combination of issues that present a greater danger, of course, to his presidency, but also to the future of the American Republic than the 3 or 4 crises, and let's call them crises. The Republicans call them crises, the administration call them challenges, but let's call them challenges that beset the American Republic today. And in my judgment, that is absolutely the case. And if you listen to Joe Biden's statement last night, you saw that statement was pitched to America. He spent little time on our allies, little time on the Afghans, and most of the time talking about the sacrifices that Americans have made and the futility of many of those sacrifices. So I think by and large, whatever the intelligence assessments were, this is a man who wants to be a transformative president at home and understands that his future and the future of the country is not going to turn on what we do with Russia or even China or Afghanistan. It will essentially deal with whether or not we can finally beat COVID, manage the economy, deal with the inequity in the society, deal with the problem of race polarization in our politics and the issue of the reality that millions of Americans disagree with millions more on basic empirical data and reality. January 6th, for example. So I think that's where Biden's priorities are. And even though today's polls indicate that the support for withdrawal has gone from 60+% to 49%, I think Biden will make an effort in the next several weeks to do as much as he can to right the wrongs that have been committed during the last week or so with our extrication and try to return to repairing our own broken house. That's where our efforts need to reside.
Barbara, in the time we have left, I want to ask you this. The last 20 years has ostensibly been about the global war on terror. What does our withdrawal from Afghanistan mean for Afghanistan in terms of being a safe haven for real terrorists?
Well, it's a big problem. I mean, I think that the current moment that we're in is clearly moral failure, but also a strategic failure. And that I think that the Taliban and Al Qaeda, for example, have had 20 years of battlefield experience to work together, grow closer together. Al Qaeda has become deeper and deeper and more localized accommodations, more specific kind of embeddedness within the Taliban and within various locations. Across Afghanistan, also, we know that the Taliban have gone across and freed, opened the jails. And, that's Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is now roaming Afghanistan in greater numbers. And I think that, that certainly what we're seeing in social media is that the extremist websites are blowing up. They're very excited about the American defeat in the Taliban takeover of Kabul. And so I think at this point, it is a really alarming turn for U.S. and global counterterrorism efforts, because I think that this has been unfortunate, like Robin was saying, a victory for the jihadists.
Well, thank you both for joining us. That is Barbara Elias, Associate Professor of Government at Bowdoin College and author of Why Allies Rebel, Defiant Local Partners in Counterinsurgency Wars. Also with us, Aaron David Miller, the author of 5 books and Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you so much for adding your perspective during this really confusing time. Thank you for joining us for this conversation about Afghanistan. Our sound engineer for today's program, KJ Keen Maladoon. This show is produced by Jonathan Smith and Cindy Hahn. I'm Jennifer Rooks. You have been listening to Maine Calling on Maine Public Radio.